Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House recess subject to the call of the Speaker.
Representative Niska moves that the House recess subject to the call of the Speaker. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the House stands in recess to the call of the Speaker. Members, let us now take a few moments to honor the life of Representative Mary Murphy. Before we begin, I would like members of Mary Murphy's family to stand and be recognized as I call their names, and members, please hold your applause till the very end. Greg Murphy, nephew. Teresa Miller, niece. Maureen Kennedy, niece. Patrick Kennedy, grandnephew. And other members of the family who are present in the gallery with us today are Dan Murphy, nephew, Jane Murphy, spouse of Dan Murphy, Kathleen Schulerick, grandniece, Kevin Murphy, grandnephew, Julie Kroger, niece, Steve Kroger, spouse of Julie Kroger, Kelly Kroger, grandniece, Mila Kruger, great-grandniece, Reese Kroger, great-grandniece, Grant Kennedy, spouse of Maureen Kennedy, and Ash Kennedy, grandniece. Thank you for being here. I now invite Greg, Teresa, Maureen, and Patrick to come into the well of the chamber for the reading of the House resolution honoring Mary Murphy. I call on Representative Lilly to begin reading the House resolution honoring the extraordinary life and work of Representative Mary Murphy. Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A House resolution honoring the extraordinary life and work of Representative Mary Murphy. Whereas Mary Murphy represented Northern Minnesota for 23 terms in the Minnesota legislature with more than 45 years of service in state government. She became the second longest serving member in the Minnesota House of Representatives and the longest serving woman in either body. And
Representative Zalesnikar.
Whereas Representative Murphy grew up in Hermantown, Minnesota, in a house built as part of the New Deal program to support families during the Great Depression, she remained living in the home as an adult and cited the help her family received as an inspiration for her career in government. The daughter of a steelworker, she went on to become a strong advocate for the labor movement and
Speaker Emerita Hortman.
Whereas in 1976, she was elected for her first term, representing parts of St. Louis and Carleton counties. Her numerous accomplishments over the decades in office include fighting for the minimum wage for tipped workers, increasing penalties for domestic abuse and sexual misconduct, and initiating funding for statewide juvenile correction facilities. She chaired the Judiciary Finance, Ethics, Energy, and Veterans Affairs committees, among many others. She initiated and authored legislation that funded Head Start, DARE, and other programs for youth. She instituted the Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College and established the wind power energy industry in Minnesota. And
Representative Liebling.
Whereas Representative Murphy also achieved a career as a remarkable teacher. She taught history and social studies at Duluth Central High School for more than 30 years, from 1964 until her retirement in 1997. She received the James Madison Fellowship for Outstanding Teachers, was named one of the Taft Institute's America's 30 Outstanding Teachers of American Government and Two-Party Politics, and mentored many young people who later worked alongside her as civic leaders. And
Representative Franzen.
Whereas, following the completion of the major capital restoration project, Representative Murphy was very influential in ensuring the House chamber had floral arrangements on each side of the rostrum, leaving her personal mark, a touch of Mary, will forever be part of the House chamber. And
Representative Lee F.
Whereas Representative Murphy passed away on December 25th, 2024. She will be remembered as an extraordinary teacher who was a role model for her students, as an exceptional human being who represented her constituents with passion and grace, and as a trailblazer who led by example. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the state of Minnesota that it gratefully acknowledges the exceptional life and service of Representative Mary Murphy.
I now invite our Lieutenant Governor and former member of the House, Minnesota House, Peggy Flanagan, to stand with the family at the well of the chamber as the governor's proclamation is read. I call on Representative Long to begin reading the governor's proclamation honoring the life of Representative Mary Murphy.
State of Minnesota Proclamation. Whereas Mary Murphy served for 46 years as a state legislator, becoming the longest-serving woman in the history of Minnesota and the second longest-serving legislator, and
Representative Johnson.
Whereas Mary graduated from Hermantown High School and the College of St. Scholastica. She then went on to teach American history and social studies at the Clover Valley High School and the Duluth Central High School while serving as a state legislator, and
Representative Creasha.
Whereas Mary had an unwavering commitment to her community and was a tireless advocate for those in need. She loved talking about politics and was inspired by the young people she encountered in her career, community, and family. And
Representative Gomez.
Whereas Mary was passionate about women's rights, labor and advocacy issues, healthcare, and criminal justice. She sought reform while pursuing equal rights for all people in Minnesota. And
Representative Davids.
Mary was an avid gardener and reader. She enjoyed spending time working on her 5-acre property and reading mysteries and biographies, especially those by or about people in Minnesota. And
Representative Hansen.
Whereas Mary passed on December 25th, 2024, she survived by her sisters-in-law, Marion Murphy and Eva Murphy, 12 nieces and nephews, many great nieces and nephews, and many, many friends, and
Representative Kozlowski.
Whereas Mary Murphy was a leader, a trailblazer, a true champion for the Northland, a compassionate friend, and a mentor to many. Her service to our state left a lasting impact and a strong legacy. Now, therefore, I, Tim Walz, Governor of Minnesota, do hereby proclaim Mary Murphy Day in the state of Minnesota. Signed, Governor Tim Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan.
I would like to take this opportunity to recognize our former members of the House and other dignitaries who are here today. And again, please hold your applause until the end because we have quite a list with us today. I want to recognize again Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. And if you could stand as your names are called, please. Congresswoman Betty McCollum. Former Speaker Dee Long. Former Speaker and current Supreme Court Justice Paul Thiessen. Former Majority Leader Ryan Winkler. Former Senate Majority Leader David Senjem. Former House Majority Leader and current Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy. Former Representative and Senator Becky Laurie. Representative Rob Eklund, Representative Julie Sandstead, Representative Bill Hilty, Representative Betty Folliard, Representative Brian Bergson, Representative John Lesh, Representative Frank Hornstein, Representative Jim Davney, Representative Donna Peterson, Representative John Ward, Representative Phil Sterner, Representative Lauren Solberg, Representative Carly Moline, Representative Joe Radinovich, Representative Mike Sundin, Representative Hunter Cantrell, Representative Jeremy Coyleen, Representative Amy Wozlowick, Representative Karen Clark, Representative Phyllis Kahn, and State Senator Sandra Pappas. Thank you for being with us today. I will now open the floor and call on members to share stories and remembrances of former Representative Mary Murphy. Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. So first off, thank you so much to everyone for a wonderful, wonderful tribute to Mary today. This is lovely. It's great to have everyone here for this. And my contribution today is flowers in memory of Mary. So when I first got elected to the State House, Mary took great care of my kids. So I know that many of you who know her know how wonderful Mary was with children and taking care of kids. But my kids would bring her flowers and she would give them candy. And it was a very good, it was a very good relationship between them. But Mary loved flowers, and I have a horticulture background in this we have here. And so Mary and I talked flowers and plants and talked about gardens a lot. And so that's how we spent a ton of time. My first session was talking with Mary about plants. And so we have flowers here in memory of Mary today. And I just appreciate everyone celebrating her and remembering her and just the incredible, incredible impact she had on my kids and all the kids in my kids' generation and my family and all families in Minnesota. So thank you very much to Mary, and thank you to everyone for remembering her today.
Representative Johnson P.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I grew up in Two Harbors, which was kind of bordering Representative Murphy's district. I remember seeing her signs all throughout the different communities as we traveled to Duluth for different events, whether it be sporting events or things like that. And I always kind of wondered who she was. And over the last 20 years, I've gotten an opportunity to get to know her, whether it was at a judge's lunch with a lot of the folks from Duluth up there, whether it was at a union hall, whether it was watching her on the floor of the House advocating for things like education or pensions. One of the things that I always admired about Representative Murphy was her ability to control a room. For many of us, myself included, we often raise the volume of our voice so that others know what we're saying, sometimes feeling that the louder we are, the more convincing our argument or our message may be. I never saw that with Mary. She was actually quite the opposite. She would wait, and then when she chose to speak, people listened. She often spoke with a soft voice, and people would just quiet down to hear and try to ensure they understood what she was saying. Quite simply, when Mary spoke, people listened. Representative Murphy dedicated her life to serving the people here in Minnesota, and we were very fortunate to have her, and somebody that we should all be looking up to and looking to her methods and how she handled herself as we move forward with this legislative session and sessions in the future. Thank you.
Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So other people of my tenure in the legislature will remember Mary's first speech to us about bonding. And I came to think of it as being taken to bonding church because she's like walking back and forth in the aisles and her fist is in the air and she's talking about what water infrastructure means to the people of Minnesota and what it means to have colleges that aren't falling apart. And you know, for me as a new member, I had no context for what capital investment meant. And so that always sticks with me when we're talking about, you know, what we can come together and build in the state of Minnesota. And we sat next to each other. I think let's see, she sat there 2019 to 2022. And so we found some commonality. We both always have knives on us in our desks or in our purse, so if you ever need anything. And there was this one, there was this time, it would have been in the 2021 session, and you know, I'd given what I thought was like a pretty good speech on the floor, and I sat down, and she leans over to me, and she's like, "You're a very good speaker. That was a really good speech." And I was like, "Thank you so much." She said, "But can I ask you a question?" I was like, "Of course." She said, "Why do you say like so much?" Do you realize that you say like every third or fourth word when you speak? I did not realize that. So it was some weeks later, and you know, when Mary said something like that to me, I took it to heart. I tried not to say like so much. So, you know, I give another speech. I think I must have been passing my bill on homelessness that year. And I sat down and I was like, "Mary, how'd I do?" And she was like, "You did so great. That was so much better." And I was like, "Well, did I say like too much?" Before I was done saying, "Did I say like too much?" she was like, 4 times. I looked down, she had hatch marks on her piece of paper for how many times I said like during my speech. So I'm gonna go back and see how many times I just said like. I'm sure it was more than 4. So Zach, Representative Stevenson, Chair Stevenson and I, and former Representative Cantrell got the chance to go up and visit her in the summer of 2021. And so it was, you know, after, I think it might have been while we were still having monthly sessions, special sessions for COVID. We just had been through, you know, what was, if you ask somebody of Mary's tenure, they were some of the most difficult years of governing that have happened in the state. You know, it was our class had been in one session, 2019, 2020, March 10th, the government shut down. That summer, we were in special session every month. George Floyd was murdered in my district. The civil unrest happened. We drove up together to visit Mary, and you know, we've all done this job. There's a lot of other folks in this room who have done this job, and I think at the time, I personally was like, how do people do this job? How do people, especially if you feel things deeply, how do you do this job? And how do you maintain for the long term, and how do you not fall apart when you're doing this job? And we arrived at her place, and I've never been anywhere like it before. One of the Works Progress Administration New Deal house. It was this beautiful little brick house, and then there's this beautiful little brick. It's like half garage, half kind of farm. Apparently, like they came and built the house and the little garage thing, and then you got like 2 chickens and a goat or something along with it, you know? And we get there, and Mary is behind her house, and she's kind of sitting on her porch, and there's these beautiful flowers all around her, and the sun's shining. It was like 70 degrees. That's my recollection. I don't know if it was true or not. And she's like reading some crappy novel, just in the sunshine. And she took us on a walk around her land, and she, notoriously like always made it home to ride the riding mower around her land, and it was just this thing that really grounded her. And she talked to us about her family and about this place, and she'd made us an apple pie with apples that her neighbor had given her, and there was like, a stainless steel bowl of whipped cream in the fridge, and we like sat on the back porch and ate this pie with her, and it was like, this is how she does it. This was, because I'd been doing it for 3 years, she'd been doing it for 40, and it was like, this place is how she does this job. Because that place, her place, grounded her in her district, in her family, in her community, and very meaningfully in like what government can do for people and what we can do for people who are having a hard time when we come together. And that's what that place was for her family. And so I'm just so thankful that I got to have that experience of what grounds her in this work and what we can do for each other together. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I get up, I'm looking in the back there, and I see Frank, and I get all nervous because I'm like, when you pass away, you kind of hope a couple people would speak for you, and one of them be Frank, of course, and Mary Murphy. She was pretty magical with her words, so it's pretty tough for the rest of us. She was really, when I think about my time with her and knowing Mary, she was really a strong woman. And she'd be so proud of all the women and what they've done in this space. I mean, think about this space. There wasn't bathrooms even. Just think about that. And so Mary Murphy and Phyllis Kahn, some of those early Dee Long and some of the others, this literally was a smoke-filled room. And I can't even tell the stories, and I've been here 20 years. But, you look at your desk and, there's a place to actually, what is that thing? Well, that's actually to hold booze. And there were spittoons. And so Mary she'd be really proud of all you women on both sides of the aisle and what you've done through the years. And she kind of tolerated us men and would educate us. She'd be really proud of Fu and taking over in his role. And some of us, she was proud of us, I think, at times. She'd let you know. It wasn't always with words. It would be a look, or I'm sure she'd tell me to get a haircut now. Early on, we don't really have it now, but there was like a sleeping caucus. There was members. Is that true? There was like a sleeping caucus, and some of them are in the back. I'm not going to name names, but if you've been here, you know who they are. Like I came in my freshman year right next to Representative Hansen in that row. The first chair there, I think he slept my whole term. And I'm like, I'm all nervous. Like, of course, you're a freshman, so you're like, wow, you can sleep. And not lose your election, you're scared. So Mary was one of the sleepers. And we can say that now because she's gone. But don't be fooled about the sleepers because they'll kick your tail at night. This place used to be tougher. We go home, and thank God for staff. I don't really care about us, but staff, it was a tough place. We'd stay after midnight, but Mary would sleep, and she'd wake up. She'd be fresh, and the rest of you are like, and they were ready to go. And again, some of the others are back there. I can't see the one I'm thinking of, but there was a whole row. I have a picture. And they were like the sleeping caucus. And the first year of Legacy, it's not legal anymore, but the Legacy, she started after it passed by the voters, and she was the first chair. And she had us go, you know how you have committees now, and everybody's like, oh, you got to get done. She pushed the clock, and we went past midnight. It was definitely past midnight. It was totally illegal. But are you going to tell Mary? I sure wasn't. I don't know anybody that would. All the lobbyists, they were there in their seat behaving. We're all students, the teacher. And she was ready to go. I don't know what time we finally ended. And that first year, a lot of people talk about what she loved and reading and books. So she added in library money, and some of that work is just historic for the state of Minnesota and her love of libraries. So, as a legislator, that was one of the things that wasn't mentioned, but she was able to, put that in, and there's amazing work all over the state. And I kind of told the new chairs, I said, hey, because I was a former chair, so I said, you put your own mark on it, but that was one of her marks that has just lived, was the libraries and her love for it, and that was for all of us. Mary loved staff, and probably the head of the list, there's a couple of people, but was the Murphy caucus, of course, for obvious reasons, so St. Patrick's Day, we'd joke about that, but then she obviously loved you, Pat, and your whole team through the years. But then, I shouldn't name names, but Catherine and Jenny Nash, they'd be sitting in there, and she was always a teacher. You'd go in the office, and she'd have the nice chair, and somebody said with a knife, and she'd be cutting an apple and having food. But she'd be in that chair, and you'd have to sit in little, fold-out chairs. And it was fun who came in the office if you'd go in there, and, everybody would come in. Both sides of the aisle would come in. Even Drazkowski would come in and ask for bonding projects and whatnot like that. But Mary loved Minnesota and was a great member of this body. And again, would be really proud of the women especially. But, one more story, sorry. So one year I was doing offices. And so Mary, you start with Lyndon Carlson, and he's staying, okay? He's staying, he's got the corner office. Mary Murphy, she's next. So I call her up, and I said, Mary, where you want to go? Because she was on a divided floor, and we had taken, I think we were in a minority, and we were getting a majority, but Mary wasn't moving. She said, I'm staying on the third floor. And I'm like, so I was like, what are you going to do, Mary? Really, you got to move. You got to go up somewhere. And she's like, no, I'm not moving, because she had her stuff. She had her closet. She was pretty locked in. So I had to call Sean. I don't know where he is. And I called Melissa, and I said, hey, what are you doing? What do we do? And then they said, just let her stay. So Mary had this lone office amongst all you Republicans, and I think Mary loved it. She didn't care, and it might have been a little hard on staff to be in the blended area, but it was pretty sweet. But Mary was tough, but she was kind and very funny. And she clearly loved Minnesota and loved serving here, and we were sure blessed as a state to have her as a member. Thank you.
Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I first met former Representative Mary Murphy in the 90s when I moved to Duluth to take my first job as a nursing home administrator. And I met her because I quickly learned that this is the body that made a lot of legislation for seniors. And we shared a love for caring for seniors. And as years went on, I would meet with her on issues that had to do with seniors and serving seniors across the state. And that grew to then meeting her at the fair. She liked the fairs. Proctor had a fair, Two Harbors had a fair. She was very interested in just watching her go through to see all the 4-H projects. I was in 4-H. And she loved to see the judging and loved to see what they made and loved to see the flowers. And it was fun to see her in her element. And in the community, you would see her walking down. I moved to Hermantown in 2005. You would see her all the time, walking down the side of the road, visiting with people. You would see her, and you will always know when you go by the Hermantown, we have a wellness center in Hermantown, and she was instrumental in making that, and it's packed, and it's growing, and she was a key visionary to have that happen. And she was always involved with the community and her parishioners, seeing her at the fish fry for Lent at St. Raphael's. She was a person that gave back in every capacity. This was a piece of her life, but her life was in education. My husband had her as a teacher in the 80s at Central. She affected many, many people's lives, and it's an honor to see so many people here today to acknowledge her. So thank you for acknowledging and celebrating a life well lived.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I took over Mary Murphy's job. Representative Gomez, you had 10 likes. 10 times you said likes. And I started late in your speech. Well, I just want to rise to say a few words. The first time I met Representative Murphy, I was 9 years old. My father, K.J. McDonald, was elected in 1976 and served with Mary Murphy for 14 years of her 45 years. I hope I'm not here that long. God save me. But anyway, it was a different time back then, Patrick Murphy. You know, they all got along well. It was before the John Marty law, and members got together often. And my mother said to me, have you met, when I was sworn in 2011, have you met Representative Murphy yet? I said, no, I have not. Will you go and make sure you say hello? She's one of the nicest person you'll meet down there. And there's a couple of them down here that are really nice, but you gotta meet Representative Murphy. She's really kind. She told me that every time they got together, and spouses got together with spouses back then. Our spouses don't get together as often today. They're too busy, I suppose. But spouses often would join their representatives and senators, I suppose. I shouldn't mention the word Senate, but at events. And Mary Murphy was always one to seek out my mother and to make sure that she was welcomed and visited. As you can imagine, a spouse, not a representative, doesn't know as many people, but Mary Murphy would always went out of her way to make sure that mom was welcomed and visited and introduced to many of the friends. For those who knew K.J. McDonald, he didn't stay long enough by my mother. He went out carousing and speaking to everybody at any gatherings, but Mary did. And so for the family, the Mary Murphy family, my mother was always very appreciative of her and her kindness and compassion and warmness to my mom. She said it was never easy being married to K.J. McDonald, but coming to an event with Mary, it was wonderful. So then I did seek out Representative Murphy to say hello. And she said, well, Representative McDonald, you know, in the perfect diction that she had, she said, I'll give you some advice. I said, what's that, Representative? She said, don't speak as much as your father. I said, well, Representative Murphy, from what I hear coming from you, I'll take that advice. Anyway, to the Murphy family, as an Irishman myself, Patrick Murphy, and another Murphy, we had a bond there with not only serving with my father and being kind to my mother, but having that old Irish charm. And for that, I'll never forget the great Mary Murphy.
Representative Hanson R.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mary would call me the stirrer. And sometimes she would look at me kind of like the kid who hid the erasers from the chalkboard. And she would say, Representative Hansen, what trouble are you stirring up now? And I would always smile and say, well, it's good. I'm just doing my job. And she would look at me, she'd have that twinkle in her eye, and she'd kind of look up at you and, Representative Hansen, what trouble are you stirring up now? So 2 years ago, I called her and I said, Representative Murphy, I've been stirring up some trouble. We have named a landfill fund for you. She goes, a landfill fund? And she chuckled, and then she knew exactly what it was. She goes, the boys created that a few years ago. So thank you for naming that. I am going to watch over that landfill fund. And then we saw her at a bonding tour, and she had that same twinkle in her eye, and she looked up and she said, I've gone to that county board meeting where we talked about the fund, and I'm going to be looking over that fund because it's mine now. So I think of that today, and she is here, looking over us, causing good trouble. Thank you.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. We served many years together on the Claims Committee, a bicameral committee that if you had many years of tenure in, you weren't on it. It had a lot of boring stuff to it, but her and I understood it was the last bastion for justice for people. And so we worked hard to help the people that, there was something in the law wasn't there to protect them, but the just and right thing to do was to honor them in claims. The toughest time was when Mary and I were the only two that voted against a claim because it would have set a precedent. Mary understood the importance of the chamber and it was not trivial to do a precedent. So what we did is we worked to have a separate bill that would give them justice and not set the precedent. Mary, in her heart, could be trusted to do what her heart said. And it was awesome working with her when it got down to people that needed someone to listen. We were the last chance for them to speak up and ask for justice. And that's why she spent so many years on that committee, was to make a little difference for the individual when they needed her. And we disagreed on some things, we agreed on many things, but I always knew she was voting from her heart. And it was great to be able to talk to her on difficult subjects and understand perspectives, because Mary had a true and wonderful heart, and I'll miss her.
Representative Zhang Jie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Today we honor and remember the incredible life and legacy of Representative Mary Murphy. Mary wasn't just a long-time legislator. She was a guiding light in this chamber. Her steady voice, historical knowledge, and fierce dedication to the people of Minnesota shaped this institution in ways many of us are still learning to appreciate. She had a way of making you feel seen, heard, and supported. Even when she didn't say much, her presence alone carried weight. In my first year in office, I served on the Legacy Committee where I saw Mary's influence firsthand. There was a proposal brought forward by a colleague to address disparities in arts funding, something I deeply believed in. A colleague member began attacking the idea, and I came in hot to defend it. I pushed back hard, tensions rose, then Mary spoke, and the whole room went quiet. Not because Mary raised her voice, but because Mary, when she spoke, you listened. She brought calm, clarity, and perspective in a way that no one else could. A few days later, she pulled me aside, and with that signature Mary Murphy wisdom, she said to me, "You should go have a beer with him if he hasn't reached out to you yet." I told Mary, I don't drink beer. Unfortunately, that member left the House to the Senate and, retired. But she believed in relationships over rivalry. She believed we could still talk to one another even when we disagreed. She lived that belief every day in this chamber. Mary influenced me to lead with inclusion, especially in committee work. As chair, I've tried to follow her example, making space for all members, listening to every voice, and putting aside politics to do the job for the people. That was Mary's way. She never sought credit, but always made a difference. We have lost a legend, but her example lives on in each of us. I will miss you dearly and will carry her lessons with me for the rest of my life. Thank you, Mary, for everything.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you. I met Mary as one of those folks. I sat in front of her my freshman year, and Mary's quite the character, and as a freshman, you don't quite know what to expect. She came in with her beautiful flowers all the time, her quick wit, her stories. I remember her sharing a picture once of her fields, and as an avid gardener myself, I was perplexed by how she had all these beautiful trillium and lady slippers everywhere in her field. Normally, when you go out into the woods, you see a couple here and there. It's a rarity, right? It's a treat, a rare treat, and she had them everywhere. And I'm like, "Mary, how on earth did this happen?" And she said, "Well, I might have helped them out a little bit to propagate in my field." And I went, "I'm not sure you're supposed to move those lady slippers, Mary." And she goes, "Who's gonna tell?" And I went, that was Mary, right? And I used to occasionally bring in flowers, and I know we have a rule now we're not supposed to, but I will tell you, if Mary were here today, I think we all know, Mary would blatantly ignore the no flower rule and do it anyway, because that's just how she rolled. But as a freshman, you don't know what to expect from this lady, right? She comes in, she starts reading The Old Turtle. And everyone in the chamber is rapt and silent as they listen to her read this story about the old turtle. And she had a way of telling these stories that was just incredible. But I think it was partially because of the wisdom she brought to this place. And she would remember things that would just boggle the mind. Sitting in front of her was a constant lesson in how much she knew in this chamber and how much history she had here. I remember it was a little bit like Mystery Science Theater in the back row. She would give commentary on all of the floor debate. And she would say fun things like, someone would say something and she'd say, "Well, that's not what you said in 1973. And I'd look at her and I go, "Mary, do you really remember what they said in 1973? And I'll tell you what, don't doubt Mary for 1 minute, because, oh yeah, she did. But she also had another fun one that I thought was kind of fun. As you know, here we allocate money for different funds. Sometimes they all get spent. Sometimes it takes a while to set things up and get the balls rolling, and it doesn't always get spent. And someone from the other side of the aisle was giving a speech, quite eloquent, and got very impassioned and said, "Well, you haven't spent all the money that we already gave you." And Mary, in her typical fashion, spoke up from the back row and she said, "Yeah, but we're gonna." And I went, "All right, Mary." It was too good. And sometimes she'd sit back there and literally eat popcorn watching the debate, because that's how she was. But I think the thing that we should all take from Mary is not just her wit and her truth-telling, but her ability to tell a story. Mary would convince people who would normally, originally as a freshman, she would start to weave this story, and everyone would suddenly get quiet, and we're like, why is everybody so quiet? And she'd start to spin these yarns, these things that had no business being together. And we'd all kind of look at her, and a few of the freshmen especially would look at her like, is she senile? Does she know where she's going with this? But slowly, she would take her time, and she would weave one thread, and then another thread, and another, and she'd keep going. And everyone would just listen. And every so often, you'd wonder, where is this going, Mary? What's going to happen next? But don't count Mary out, because in the end, she would weave together the most intricate fabric. And every single time, she would nail the landing. And all of a sudden, all of these little threads that seemed to make no sense suddenly formed this beautiful story in this beautiful quilt. Because that's how she was. But what I think we should all aspire to be like Mary. Because every time she spoke with meaning. She spoke with dignity. Her speech lifted people up and brought them together. But moreover, every story she told, we all walked away with a lesson. We all walked away better for listening to her story, to taking the time to listen to her weave that story. Hopefully someday we can all aspire to be a Mary Murphy. And I just want to say thank you to her family for lending her to us for a little while. It was a true honor and a privilege to serve with her. And we are so grateful to you allowing us to have her for a time. Thank you.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm honored to say some words about Representative Mary Murphy. The thing I wanted to mention, there were certain very specific things that she cared deeply about. One time I carried a bill dealing with libraries, and the bills had made it through the committee process. I was feeling pretty good about myself. Then suddenly I heard Representative Murphy has some thoughts about this bill. You should go talk to her. And I got a little worried, but she gave me great advice to make the bill better, and I'm glad Representative Lee has a bill dealing with libraries that's on the calendar for today. I think that's a great way to honor her. But I remembered one thing about her while people were talking. This is another thing that she cared deeply about, and that's the state flag and the state seal. And I remembered after she'd left the House, she left me a voicemail message about it. And I was able to find, while people were talking, I was able to find the voicemail message and listen to it and transcribe it. It's from about 2 years ago. I think she would have been okay with me searching my computer while other people were talking about her. Actually, I'm not sure she would be, but she would have forgiven me after the fact, because she was a very forgiving person. But it was wonderful hearing her voice while people were talking about it. Anybody who's interested, welcome to come up and I can play you the voicemail I got from her. But just in relevant part, she said, I wanted to give my opinion about the seal and the flag. I like the flag with the trees and the star and the lines on either side representing the counties and sovereign nations. That's my favorite flag. My favorite seal is the busy one with the yellow and blues and wild rice and loon and the North Star. And then the message kind of cut off. So I'm happy to say she got the seal she wanted. The flag was not the one that the Flag Commission ended up picking, but I saw her after the fact and at an event. This was maybe several months after the flag had made official, and she said, finally saw that flag flying, and it looked great to me. So here's to you, Representative Mary Murphy. Thank you for all the wisdom you imparted to me over the years.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members, and it's an honor to say a couple words about Representative Murphy. And I was very honored to also attend the funeral and meet many of the family there, and many staff were there. Mary had a big following. I was very fortunate to know Mary a long time. In fact, I knew Mary way back when Leon Lilly didn't even have hair. So it's been a while. A couple of things as I think through, in 2013, I came in, former Representative Joe Radinovich, we were in the class together, and there's a group of us, but I came in and I was on her committee, the State Gov Committee. It was the first committee I was at. I was on it because I had this Camp Ripley in my district, and I think that was the only reason that I had it. I had other interests. But she had us sit every other member, so it was a DFL member, GOP, and it was a very good way to be introduced into the committee, and you had to talk to your colleagues from both sides. And the interesting thing was, in 2013, that's when Pope Francis also came in, and I was sitting next to Steve Simon, and we were able to talk about the ramifications of that and the interesting parts of the world. But those conversations led me through many of the legislation and how I've legislated here. And there's a law of primacy that I'm very familiar with. We probably all know. What you learn first is what sticks with you. And on that committee, I watched the way that she handled all the discussions from both sides. Former Representative, now Senator Jeff Howe, who we sat in that row over there, he had a bill come up, and it just wasn't ready. And it was interesting because when a bill would come up and the other side had a chance to possibly take that bill down or not let it get through committee, she, with all the grace in the world, asked him in the middle of his testimony, because she knew he was struggling with his bill. She just said, "Representative Howe, would you like me to table your bill?" And he emphatically said yes. And the bill was tabled, and it was brought back up, and it was done 2 more times until he finally got it right. But she allowed him to work through the process, and she allowed him to get it right. Another memory I have is I had a bill, the first bill that I had was in State Gov, and the committee administrator, Ms. Nash at the time, I think there was 15 or 16 bills on there, and that time of the session, right before deadlines, everybody's asking for a hearing. And everybody's telling the chair why they have to be heard first, because they have to be in 6 other committees and their bill is up and they have these amendments, and they should be the first ones. And I just came to Representative Murphy, I said, "Hey, just put me wherever you'd like." I said, "I'm just grateful to have a hearing." And as I sat down, the committee administrator, Ms. Nash, came out and she said, "Representative Murphy would like to hear your bill first." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Well, yeah." She said, "Everybody else is making all these demands and you didn't ask for anything, so you're first." And I learned there that was the grace by which she operated. And I worked with her on a couple other bills. She helped me with the military museum that now through the bonding chairs, Chair Lee and others that have helped, we now have that as a reality. But she started that because not only did she have a big love for libraries, but she also had a love for museums. And it was wonderful. The last thing that I'll leave you with, you probably, if you've been around here a little bit, you know that after this time when we come back from the Easter Passover break and we start to spend more and more time on the House floor, that there's big lulls. And Speaker Thiessen, former Speaker Thiessen, was the speaker at the time. And we would have these long debates and these long floor sessions where we were just here forever. And I learned 2 things about Representative Murphy. She liked ice cream. And so I would go grab her from her seat and I'd say, "Hey, let's go get some ice cream. It's going to be a while." And I always knew that she knew how long the floor sessions were going to be, so we could be gone for a while. So we'd go to the Grand Old Creamery and we'd have ice cream. And at the time I was driving a Suburban, and she would sit in the front seat and her feet couldn't touch the floor. So she'd just dangle her feet and she'd laugh the whole way. And I'm like, "When do we have to be back?" She's like, "Don't worry about it." And then the other thing I learned, she would get to the state office building very early and she would do her hair. And if you caught her in the hallway, that was a great time to lobby her for bills. And so I got lots of hearings through that. But Mary Murphy always had great grace, and she treated everybody with just an impeccable understanding and really appreciated that. And I learned a lot from her, and we'll always appreciate those early days and thank her. So her memory is great, and thank you to her family.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to read a letter from United States Senator Tina Smith. To the friends and family of Mary Murphy, thank you for gathering today to honor the life and legacy of my friend Mary, a dedicated public servant and a defining figure in Minnesota's legislative history. Mary was a force. For 46 years, she fought fiercely for working people, for teachers and students, for rural communities, and for the preservation of Minnesota's history. She never shied away from saying what she thought, often with a smile and always with fierce conviction. I will always remember Mary in her tomato red coat and white curls bouncing as she walked through the halls of the state capitol. She was the longest serving woman legislator in Minnesota history, but she was also much more. Mary was a teacher, a historian, and someone who never stopped caring about her constituents, her colleagues, and her beloved Northland. I counted on her as a friend and advisor for years. We lost a trailblazer, but her legacy will live on in the policies she shaped, and the people she mentored, and in the example she set for generations of Minnesotans to come. May her memory be a blessing as we carry her spirit with us and continue the work she loved. Sincerely, Tina Smith. And I'll just add one brief story to the number of stories that we heard today. So as a first-term legislator, a few of us were back in the back row on a long session, and we were a little bored and feeling mischievous. So we asked Mary, Mary, you've been here a long time. Who's the least favorite legislator you've ever served with? And she said, that's a really long list. And we said, well, we have time. She said, well, why don't you print it out? So we printed out a list of every member that she'd ever served with. And she very diligently looked through the whole list and took notes and then would scratch names off and kept going. And she spent a good chunk of time on this list trying to figure out who it was. And then eventually she settled on somebody who I don't even remember who it was, so I'm not going to disclose the name. But she said, the reason why I settled on this legislator is because he didn't like women in the legislature. She said, to Representative Lilly's point, she said, he was not nice to women, and so I can never forgive him for that. So that was her one individual from her time serving, but she took her job very seriously, but also with a good grain of humor, as she always does, and a good smile. So we'll always remember Mary fondly.
Representative Kozlowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'm really proud to stand in honor of Mary, our fierce Titan of the Northland and for the state of Minnesota. Mary Murphy was definitely one of the most fashionable people in her red coat. She was, as many know, the keeper of some of the best tea. And I would also say one of the most resourceful people I've ever met. It's really hard for us up north to go to a place in our community where Mary's fingerprints aren't all over it and her name's not on it because she had a hand in making it come to life, whether it was a community center or water infrastructure, roads and bridges to our tribal college in our backyard. I think it's really fitting that she passed away at Christmas time because as we're telling stories today and remembering, she was really a gift to our community, to her beloved family, but also to our state. And I recall the priest at her service saying she often rushed him along getting to the end because she had work to get done. And I think we feel it here today, and as we go forward, that I think she's still at it. For me and for many, there really wasn't a time when Mary Murphy wasn't there, putting her subtle classic Mary's touch in our schools in Duluth, here at the Capitol, because she served for quite a bit longer than I've been alive. As an educator in Duluth, she actually worked with my grandma. My grandma worked in Indian education for 25 years, and they worked side by side in the schools, serving and fighting for workers' rights, fighting for our students and our families and our communities. Mary really had EQ and IQ, and it was something that she needed as oftentimes the only woman at the table up north. And I think people learned pretty quick that you shouldn't mistake her quietness for weakness. I remember one time, I didn't get a chance to serve with her, but I was in a large meeting with her, and she sat there quietly sitting back. She had a plate of Oreo cookies in front of her, and she kind of pulled them apart and was licking them and eating them. And then she quietly and firmly pulled apart the folks in the room. And she leaned over to Rep. Liz Olson and me, just two kids from the West End in Duluth. And she said, "Never mind any noise, now have a cookie." But really, Mary the gardener taught us that we're here to shake things up and that you can't be blown over by the wind in these spaces when your roots are planted really strong. I think Mary really showed us how to lead soft and fierce by leading with her heart out front. And I think we can honor her by doing the OG Mary way. You know, Mary, as many know, didn't have a cell phone. She struggled with her laptop. But she built relationships. She knew everybody's names. She knew their kids' names and their grandkids' names. She did this work by listening to stories and then quietly delivering. At Mary's own party, which many of our educators are in the room, and some of you were there, at her party, and she was about an hour late because she had to run home to get that old turtle book. But what I told Mary in that room, is that as Ojibwe people, we have a word for someone like Mary, and that's Ogimakwe. I said, that means old lady, but it's actually the highest honor that we could give you. It's the person that holds everything together, that stands in the gap, and blazes a trail so that all of those coming behind can continue it forward. And so today, I just want to say, with your family, with so many friends, with our community and our state, happy Mary Murphy Day, and I hope we get to go raise a blueberry muffin in honor of our favorite Mary Murphy. Thank you.
Speaker Emerita Hortman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, as people have noted, Mary never stopped being an educator, and she helped a lot of us become members and learn how to be good members of the House of Representatives. Some of the more senior members were very direct. Representative Davids told me, freshmen are supposed to be seen but not heard. Mary would deliver that message in a softer way, with a look, with a smile. She would let me know when maybe I had spoken too much or if I had spoken well. But what she really taught me was that the House of Representatives is not this building, though the building can kind of pull you in. It's very regal, it's very grand. The House of Representatives is a collection of people. And that point is really made by all the people who came back to be here today. People who spent hours and hours on this floor, some of which were very miserable, and knew that this would probably go too long and there'd probably be too many speeches, but came anyway. Because it's the things that we do together here, it's the work that we do together here, but it's the relationships, it's how we treat each other and the things that we do together that make the House of Representatives. When we leave here, it will be the people that we remember in these relationships. Mary didn't speak very often on the House floor, but when she stood to speak, you never knew whether it was going to be the best speech you ever heard in your life or just the longest. You weren't sure, was she going to land that plane? And most of the time she did. My favorite Mary Murphy speech was one I think she did in favor of a bonding bill. She was talking about, it could have been an agriculture bill because there was funding for county fairs. And she started talking about county fairs in great detail. And this one particular fair, she told us everything about that fair. And it was a very long story. But in the end, the upshot was she had her first kiss at a county fair. And for that reason, we should make sure and properly fund the county fairs. So, knowing that, I still asked her to do nominating speeches for me for speaker 3 times. And I remember sitting there thinking, land the plane, Mary, land the plane. She has a number of legislative accomplishments. Those of us serving here today don't know all of them. It was pretty cool to read the ones that had been picked out for the resolution. I think the biggest legacy from my standpoint is what she's done to pensions. She has overseen some of the greatest investment in pensions in Minnesota history, and it's because it was deeply meaningful to her. She felt responsible to the people who were receiving those pensions to do it right. And then the 2020 bonding bill, which was really the saga of the century, and to that point, the largest bill in Minnesota history. She probably worked more on that bill than any bill that's ever been worked on in the Minnesota House, really, truly, because the only reason it passed was all of those special sessions, those monthly special sessions, that we finally passed it in October. Only Mary Murphy could have done that. But probably the biggest legacy that she leaves is the relationships. I feel very blessed to have been part of Mary Murphy's legislative family. Many of us are in that special club. I want to especially thank Mike Sundin, who was a really important member of her legislative family there in the last few days of her life, and keeping all of us in the loop of what was going on with Mary. She's gone way too soon. We'll never forget Mary, and we'll never stop telling Mary Murphy stories.
Members, please rise in honor of Mary Murphy for a moment of silence. I call the House back to order. The next order of business is calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for today is House File 1090. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1090, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to capital investment, renaming the Library Construction Grant Program in honor of former Representative Mary C. Murphy.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Lee F., to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, in Mary Murphy's final years in the legislature, she was the chair and the vice chair of the House Capital Investment Committee, where library construction grant have a very special place in her heart. And as we have heard, as an avid reader and defender of education, I think it is fitting for us to name the library construction grants under the Department of Education after Mary Murphy, the Mary C. Murphy Construction Grants Program. Anyone who knew Mary knew she was passionate about libraries. As a longtime school teacher, she wanted to make sure libraries were accessible to all Minnesotans of all ages and backgrounds to grow knowledge and to promote lifelong learning. She also liked a good mystery story like what Representative Davids have mentioned earlier before. And real quickly, just sharing some stats about the Library Construction Grants Program for all of you. There are 12 regional library systems in the state of Minnesota with 359 public libraries. There are 8 bookmobiles across the entire state, and there's at least 1 public library in every county in the state of Minnesota. The program, like I mentioned before, is established under the Department of Education. Eligible applicants include cities, counties, and regional public library systems. And there are 2 types of projects that are eligible for the program. The first one is improvement projects to renovate, expand, and construct libraries. And then the second one is to help with accessibility projects to remove barriers for people accessing these libraries. This program requires a 50% match, and it goes through a very competitive review process, and the estimated funding need for the state of Minnesota is around $89 million. With that, I'll end my introduction. Thank you.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, House File number 1090.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I will just just quickly share some stories about my friend Mary Murphy. I would consider her also one of my great mentors too. In 2019, Mary Murphy was named the House Capital Investment Chair, and I was assigned as her vice chair. For me, this was the first time that I actually, began working with Mary Murphy, having been in the minority with her, and didn't really know what to expect out of it. I remember very early on, it was the polar vortex, and we happened to have the 8 a.m. committee hearings, and I was 30 minutes late, and Mary Murphy wasn't very fond of me being late to committee as the vice chair. Mary Murphy was a very inclusive chair. She invited me to join him on all of her bonding meetings, and there were a lot of them. I learned from Mary on how to lead a committee and to be very collaborative in the approach and really to listen and seek input so that all members of the committee could take pride and ownership of the bill that we're building for the state of Minnesota. Mary took her work very seriously at the House. We will never forget her love for some of the engineering marvel called the roundabout. And members, if you have served on the Capital Investment Committee, we typically had the big construction firms come and talk about the state of infrastructure in the state of Minnesota. And I remember fondly, we had a bunch of engineers that was in front of us talking about how roundabouts are very traffic calming, and you could just see in Mary's face, she lit up and told the engineers that there's nothing calm about roundabouts. Because if you have heard, she was stuck in a roundabout up north back home, and she couldn't get out of it. And so to this day, we should not mention roundabouts to Mary Murphy, but she really loves and to share stories and jokes with all of us. And I remember sitting in her office on the third floor. I think one of our friends from the other body is still here. At that time, Mary Murphy was trying to get the other body to work with us on a bonding bill, but they wanted to create a bonding bill to the effect of what they call a very vanilla bill. And I remember Paul Cummings coming to Mary Murphy's office with a bag of pistachio. And Mary requested the bag of pistachio because she wanted some flavor. She said, we cannot just build a vanilla bonding bill. We need to have some flavor to the bonding bill. And so really appreciate Paul for bringing those pistachios to her office, and Mary with her little knife and her apple in her office offering that for us when we were going late into sessions for negotiation. And I wanted to just, share why, she really wanted us to look at bonding, because she feels like, a lot of communities have different needs across the entire state of Minnesota. And she taught me to be thoughtful and deliberate about communities, as not a lot of communities across the state are comfortable with coming to us and ask us for financial assistance. And this reminds me of back in 2019 when I was the vice chair, and Chair Zhang came to committee with a tray of egg rolls for his bridge for his mom. And Mary Murphy was not too happy about that, and she scolded Chair Zhang and all of us. And I think, for the newer members, I think that's why over the last few years, as chair of the Capital Investment Committee, I do not want any members to come to the committee with any food or anything like that. Mary thought that was very, she didn't look too highly of that. She thought that was bribery or whatnot, and that, communities are already uncomfortable. We should not be making them bring food for us, even though that's through first-term members. And so, from that day, just really learned and picked up a lot from Mary Murphy, and really appreciate all of her work. And members, I encourage you to, help please, vote in support of this bill to rename the library construction grants the Mary C. Murphy program. And then just real quickly to her family, just want to say thank you all for sharing Mary Murphy with all of us. You may not know, but Mary was a true friend and a mentor for me, being the giant at the Northland and me being from Minneapolis. I never would have thought that we would have built a strong connections. And every day until she passed, when I reach out to her, she will ask about my two kids, my son Tane, who she met, and then my baby Davis, that she wasn't able to meet in person, but always asked for a picture of when we were around. And so just want to say thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. I encourage a green vote for this bill to rename the library construction grants after Mary C. Murphy. Thank you all.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Hill.
Go for it.
Hill, yes.
Hill votes aye. Keeler.
Keeler, aye.
And Keeler votes aye. Norris.
Norris, aye.
Norris votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski, aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 132 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title is agreed to.